Today we are going to be thinking about interface design for games.
The task ahead is terrible.
This is something that's come up a lot of times when I've asked people what sort of things they want me to cover.
Weakness cannot be tolerated. Darkest Dungeon
It's a game that is all interface and you can kind of just pick it apart for hours with this stuff. One of the things that I find interesting is, like, if you look at the stuff where you are managing your party outside of a mission and then within a mission, there is relatively little that actually carries across. Like, you look at these two things and you understand they're from the same game because the style is the same and there are loads of kind of common design elements in terms of style. But this menu and this menu, they do not actually share the like position of particular things. In fact, I think the only thing I can see that is familiar between these is like this guy's portrait. Like the portraits are used here and here. What I'm trying to convey with this is that every screen of this game has been built from first principles of what is the player doing right now, what do they need to be able to understand. And they're not building it from the basis of like what's easy for me as a developer to do, right? They're not going, well, on the last screen this was in this place, so I'm going to leave it there because it would be hard for me to move it. No, they're building everything from the basis of like, what does the player need to understand at this moment? And that's why we don't have like the money indicator when you're in a dungeon, because it's not relevant when you're playing in the dungeon, right?
You are a part of this place.
If I'm looking at a screen in your game, if there are more than 7 things for me to kind of take in and think about and understand separately as different things, then I'm going to get overwhelmed. And this is to do with how most people's short-term memories work. Most card games start you off with between 3 and 5 cards, and 7 as an absolute maximum. And that is because 7 unique items is the limit for most people's cognition. I've got 1 here for characters, 1 here for missions. I've got some stuff here explaining the quest I'm on. I've got rewards here. 5 if I perceive all of these currencies as one thing. 6 here for the little thing I drop my characters into. And then 7 here, right? This is a relatively complex screen, but it still obeys that rule of not having more than 7 distinct things. Now, when I say 7 things, I mean like 7 categories of thing, right? We can have loads of different characters. We're going to read that as a set of things, right? So we see that and we see a list. And we don't need to immediately pass all of the information in that list. We can just go, okay, there's a list of characters there. And we can look at this in the middle and say, okay, there's a bunch of missions here. And if I want to think about which mission to do, I can then focus in on that and pick one and so on. But in terms of the whole screen, there's like 1 thing here, 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 and 1 thing here. And the ones that are not relevant for during the gameplay are not there, right? They're just not there. So we don't have the currency when we're playing. And all of that is about just trying to keeping the amount of information that the player needs to take on board at any given time to the bare minimum. And then there are all sorts of visual things going on to make sure that you're not concentrating on the wrong place as well, right? If I blur these images, the text stands out really well because it's kind of a warm color and it's lighter. When the art is kind of background art, it just stays black and gray. And then when it's a character or something important, that's when we sort of have the color rationed to make it pop. But even if you take color out of the picture and you look at this black and white version, you can see the difference in value, right? And if you're making a game that's very soft and pastel, you need different ways to achieve that. Maybe you have a very soft pastel background and then there are certain things that you make very bold and dark to stand out on top of that. But you need some kind of language of how you push things back and how you bring things forward. If you don't have that, then people are just going to read it as a bunch of noise. I think a really good reference point for pastel games for a really good interface is Bad North. Bad North is a great example of a game that's got this lovely, lovely washed out pastel aesthetic, but the really important things in the GUI have very bold colors that stand out really nicely. So that's a cool one to look at as well. Information hierarchy is just the idea of there are things that are more important for someone to pay attention to. We build a hierarchy of what's the most important thing, and then we add as much information to that as possible to make it stand out, right? So here we've got more use of color. Down here, the stuff that's not really important is just the black and gray. Each thing we can see within the art has a lower internal contrast, because if we look at these trees here, okay, they use the same black outlines as everything else, but the kind of difference between the black and the brown there is hardly anything, whereas up here we've got black outlines and then we've got like garish pinks and these bone colors and everything. It's creating a lot of contrast, so when we look at that object we know it's important because it's got high internal contrast. It's not just adding the information to explain the things, which is what all this is, right? So, you know, a skull is a boss and a green skull is an easy boss. A red whatever this grid means is like a scouting mission, but it's a red one, so it's hard. But it's also about how do you create a sort of bland background for that information to pop out on. The thing about information hierarchy is if you make everything look important, then nothing is important anymore, right? So you have to have some way of saying that things aren't important, and that could be making them dark, it could be blurring them, it could be making them washed out and pastel and then having darker things pop out on top of it. There are lots of different ways of achieving that, but it depends on the style of your game as well.